Warren Slade found the envelope tucked between a utility bill and a pizza coupon on a Tuesday afternoon in October, sitting on the kitchen counter of his rented house in Raleigh like something that didn't belong there. His 9-year-old son Felix was at the kitchen table doing homework, chewing on the end of a pencil, and the house smelled like the pasta Warren had burned slightly because he'd been on a phone call he couldn't end. He picked up the envelope and went still. The return address was San Diego. The handwriting on the front was Camille Draper's. Even after 8 years, he recognized it immediately. She had always written her capital letters with a slight backward lean, like they were bracing against wind. "Dad," Felix said without looking up, "you're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The staring at something thing. You do it when something's wrong." Warren set the envelope down and opened it slowly. "Camille Draper and Derek Fontaine request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration at Beaumont Plantation Estate in Savannah, Georgia." Beneath the printed text in that same backward-leaning handwriting. "I hope you're doing well, Warren. It would mean a lot to see you. Camille." Warren read the note twice. Then he folded the invitation back along its original crease and set it on the counter with the kind of careful precision people use when they are very deliberately not throwing something across the room. "Dad," Felix said, "is it bad news?" Warren looked at his son. Felix had his mother's eyes, a light, steady brown that seemed to register everything before the brain had fully processed it. Rebecca had died 4 years ago in a rain-soaked intersection on I-40, a red light runner who never even stopped. Warren had been in a conference call with a deputy secretary when the hospital number appeared on his phone. He still remembered exactly which exit he had been passing on the highway. "No," Warren said, "old news." Felix studied him with those light brown eyes, then nodded and went back to his math. Warren picked up the invitation again and looked at the date, 6 weeks away. Across the country, Camille sat in a suite overlooking the Pacific while her best friend refilled a glass of white wine and scrolled through the guest list on a tablet. "You really sent him one," her friend said. Camille arranged a throw pillow behind her back and smiled at nothing in particular. "It's just closure. You literally told me last year you never wanted to hear that name again." That was different. Camille turned toward the window and the gray December ocean beyond it. He was struggling then, it felt mean. But now that he's apparently still just puttering around somewhere in North Carolina, I think it'll be fine. Good for him to see how things worked out. Her friend looked at her for a long moment. "Camille." "What?" "Nothing." She scrolled further down the list. "Nothing." Camille had known Warren Slade for 6 years, loved him for 4, and spent the last 8 convincing herself she had made the right decision. Back then, they had been living in a cramped apartment in Charlotte, and she was 3 years into her corporate law career, putting in 70-hour weeks to prove herself at a firm that ate associates alive. Warren was doing something in IT security. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation and drove a car with a headlight that kept going out and never seemed bothered by any of it. She was bothered by all of it. The night she left, she had tried to be kind about it. "I need someone who has a plan," she had told him. "I need to know where I'm going to be in 10 years. Warren had listened without arguing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't beg, didn't try to reframe or negotiate. He just nodded once, slowly, and said, "I understand." And then he helped her carry boxes to her car in the rain. She drove away and told herself the calmness meant he didn't love her enough to fight for it. She had spent a long time believing that. The Beaumont Plantation Estate in Savannah looked like the kind of place that existed specifically to make guests feel like they were inside a painting. White columned porticos, ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss. String lights wound through the branches above the garden terrace, and the Savannah River glittered half a mile away in the fading December light. Camille's wedding coordinator had been planning this for 11 months. Every detail had been reviewed twice, including the seating chart. Warren Slade's place card read Table 22, a round table positioned near the side entrance used by the catering staff, half obscured by a decorative screen of climbing roses. His tablemates were a cousin of Derek's who hadn't spoken to the family in years, a former work acquaintance of Camille's from a firm she'd left in 2019, and 2 people whose names she genuinely did not remember placing there. She had approved this arrangement personally. She had imagined Warren sitting there in a flannel shirt or whatever he wore now, watching her dance with Derek under the chandeliers in the great hall, and she had told herself the feeling that produced was closure. She was less certain what to call it at 3 in the morning. The ceremony began at 5. By 6:15, cocktail hour was flowing across the rear garden, and Camille was moving through the crowd in a gown that had taken 4 months to make, accepting congratulations with the ease of a woman who had practiced receiving them her entire life. Derek stood beside her, pleased with himself in the way of a man who had built a hotel group worth several $100 million and never stopped being surprised that people were impressed by it. He shook hands firmly and called everyone friend. At 6:42, a gray Range Rover turned through the estate's iron gate, then a second one, then a third. The valets at the entrance exchanged looks. The vehicles stopped in sequence outside the portico. The doors opened, and 4 people stepped out before Warren did, 2 men and 2 women, all in dark clothing, all moving with the unhurried attention of people who spent their professional lives reading rooms before entering them. Warren stepped out of the middle vehicle last. He was wearing a navy suit, no tie, a white shirt with the top button open. He had one hand in his pocket. His other hand held Felix's. Felix was 9 years old and wearing a gray blazer that was slightly too big for him, carrying a book under his arm, the Phantom Toll Booth with a cracked spine from being read too many times. The conversations on the garden terrace didn't stop all at once. They faded unevenly, like lights going out one by one in a building. One of the groomsmen near the bar frowned. "Who is that?" Someone near the rose garden said, "He has security." Someone else said, "Is that military?" Derek turned from a conversation with his CFO and looked toward the entrance. His expression didn't change immediately. It took about 3 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, who invited someone with a detail. Camille appeared at his side and looked toward the gate. The blood left her face. Not because of the cars. Not because of the security personnel. Because of the way Warren Slade was walking, with that same quiet, eyes-forward calm he'd always had, except it had thickened into something else over 8 years. Something that made the air around him feel different. Felix looked up at the lights in the oak trees and tugged Warren's hand. "It's really pretty, Dad," he said. Warren looked up for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "it is." The estate manager materialized at the side entrance in under 90 seconds. He was a small man with silver hair and 20 years of experience managing events that required discretion, and he was currently moving with the controlled urgency of someone who had made a significant oversight. "Mr. Slade," he said, slightly breathless, "I apologize. We weren't notified of your arrival. If you'd prefer the private salon while your team—" "Table 22 is fine," Warren said. The manager hesitated. "Sir, that's near the—" "It's fine." Warren said it without hardness, which somehow made it more final. Felix looked up at the manager with serious eyes. "We like to sit in the back," he said helpfully. "Easier to leave if it gets boring." One of the security personnel near the entrance briefly covered a smile with 2 fingers. The manager recovered himself. "Of course, right this way." Camille watched this exchange from across the terrace. She realized her champagne glass was tilted at a dangerous angle and corrected it. Derek appeared beside her. "You know him." "I told you, he's—" "Your ex, I know." Derek watched Warren cross the garden with the patient disinterest of a man who had never been in a room where he wasn't the most important person in it. "He looks like he's done all right." Camille said nothing. "The security is a bit much," Derek added. Camille still said nothing, because she was watching Warren stop briefly to let Felix examine a moth that had landed on the string lights, and she was feeling something she didn't have a clean name for. Inside the Great Hall, dinner moved through its courses with the efficiency of 11 months of planning. The jazz quartet played softly near the fireplace. The speeches were funny and warm. Derek held Camille's hand on the table and smiled at the right moments. But the room's attention kept drifting. Not aggressively, not obviously, just gravitating. Warren Slade was not performing. He wasn't holding court or making eye contact with powerful people across the room. He was sitting at table 22 near the catering screen, helping Felix work through a difficult passage in his book, occasionally laughing at something Felix said in a low voice. That was the part that was hard to explain afterward. Men who wanted to be noticed acted like it. Warren Slade seemed to be doing everything possible to go unnoticed. And yet, Derek's financial advisor, a careful man named Bergstrom, who had made his money reading situations correctly before anyone else, excused himself from a conversation near the bar and approached Derek with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Quick word," he said. Derek stepped away. "The gentleman near the catering screen," Bergstrom said, voice low. "Do you know who he is?" "Camille's ex." Bergstrom looked at him. "Warren Slade." "Right." "Derek," a pause, Slade Analytical Group. Derek stared at him. The government contract firm, Bergstrom continued. Cybersecurity, private intelligence, institutional risk. DoD advisory contract renewed last quarter. Derek's expression underwent a slow rearrangement. That's not. It is. Bergstrom took a quiet sip of his drink. Valuation somewhere north of $3 billion. They don't do press. That's why you haven't heard the name. Derek looked across the room at Warren Slade, helping his 9-year-old son find his page in a worn paperback. Bergstrom said delicately, I mention it only because I thought you'd want to know who your wife invited. Derek set his glass down on the nearest table and went to find Camille. At table 22, a man named Prescott, one of Derek's distant associates placed there for reasons unclear to everyone including himself, had spent 20 minutes working up the courage to lean toward Warren and speak. I heard your firm handled the Singapore situation, he finally said. The executive extraction. Warren looked up from Felix's book, partially. I thought that was military. It was a cooperative operation. Prescott stared at him. You don't talk like someone who runs a $3 billion company. Felix looked up from his page without being addressed. Dad says the people who need you to know they're important usually aren't. He said it matter-of-factly, the way 9-year-olds state conclusions they've heard enough times to have fully absorbed. Then he went back to reading. Prescott laughed, slightly uncomfortable, then more genuinely. Warren gave Felix a patient look. Felix mouthed sorry without lifting his eyes from the book. At the main table, Camille had listened to Derek repeat what Bergstrom told him and felt the edges of the evening begin to tilt in a direction she couldn't stop. Talk to him, Derek said. I'm not going to. Camille. Something in his voice was different now. Not angry, careful, the way he got careful when he was deciding something. Go talk to him. Find out why he's really here. I invited him. I know why you invited him. Derek looked toward table 22 again. Find out why he came. She found Warren outside, near the garden edge where the string lights thinned and the property dropped into a slope of winter grass overlooking the river. Felix had been sent to the dessert table with the understanding that he could sample one of everything before anyone noticed. Warren was leaning against the garden railing with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. Warren, she said. He turned. For a moment he simply looked at her, the same way he had always looked at her, taking his time, unhurried. Congratulations, he said. The venue is beautiful. I didn't know, she said. He waited. About your company, I didn't know any of it. Warren said, why would you? You could have told me. He was quiet for a moment. The river was a black ribbon in the distance. I wasn't running anything when you left. I was doing government contract work. There was nothing to tell, and the things that were happening, I couldn't talk about them. Camille crossed her arms against the December cold. You seemed like you were just staying still. I know how it looked. The memory returned so fast it felt physical. Their Charlotte apartment, the exhaustion of years compressing into one sentence. I need to know where I'm going to be in 10 years. Warren sitting at the kitchen table, saying nothing. Looking at the wall, she had read the silence as emptiness. She had been wrong about what it was. Warren. Camille. Not unkindly. You made a decision with what you had. That's what people do. She studied his face. The years were in it differently than she'd expected. Not bitterness, not damage, just weight. The kind that came from carrying serious things alone for a long time. Then why did you come? She finally asked. Warren thought about it. Felix wanted to see Savannah, he said. He's been reading about the history. A pause. And I suppose I wanted to see that you were happy. Camille's throat tightened in a way she was not prepared for. Before she could respond, Derek appeared on the garden path behind her. His smile was precise and warm and reached nothing above his cheekbones. There you two are, he said. He extended a hand toward Warren. Derek Fontaine, I feel like I should finally meet you. Warren shook his hand. Warren Slade. Derek assessed him the way men in his position assessed other men, looking for the gap between performance and reality. He found no gap, which unsettled him more than a gap would have. Interesting firm you've built, Derek said. We do all right. Government work, I hear. Some. Derek smiled. You must have interesting clients. Warren said, the interesting thing about my clients is that I don't discuss them. A silence that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Derek changed tacks with the ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times in boardrooms. Well, any friend of Camille's. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder. I'll let you two catch up. He walked back toward the hall without hurrying. Camille watched him go, then she turned back to Warren. He asked you about clients. He did. That's strange. Warren looked toward the river. Is it? It was not a question, and something in the way he said it made Camille realize she had just been told something without being told anything at all, and she stood in the December garden trying to understand what it was. The woman arrived at 8:47. No one on the guest list had her name. She had not been invited. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, with the economical posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture communicated rank. She walked through the main entrance with 2 assistants and 3 people in dark suits, who were clearly not guests. Camille's coordinator met her at the door and was sent backward by a look. The room recognized her in stages. Someone near the quartet said, Is that Admiral Reese? Someone else said, Here? Why is she here? Admiral Paula Reese was the former director of National Intelligence's principal cybersecurity advisor, a position that no longer appeared on any public record. She had testified before the Senate 3 times in closed session. Her name appeared in exactly 1 published profile from 2009, which she had never commented on. She walked across the Great Hall toward table 22. Warren stood before she reached him. Paula, he said. Warren. Her expression shifted only slightly when she looked at Felix. How are you doing, young man? Felix put down his book. I tried 4 desserts, he said. The lemon tart was the best. Noted. She turned to Warren. We need to discuss the Fontaine file. Warren said, Tonight? The timing is what it is. She handed him a slim portfolio. The task force moved the timeline. The room had gone quiet in the way it goes quiet when people are trying very hard to look like they aren't listening. Warren opened the portfolio. He read for approximately 45 seconds. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a kind of settling, the way pressure changes before weather arrives. He looked up. Derek Fontaine was standing 20 feet away. Neither of them spoke. Derek's CFO appeared at his elbow and said something low. Derek's face did the same slow rearrangement it had done when Bergstrom said the name Slade Analytical Group. Except this time the rearrangement kept going, past confusion, past calculation, all the way to something that looked like a man watching a wall fall toward him. What's in the file? Derek said. He wasn't looking at Warren. He wasn't asking Warren. Admiral Reese turned to him with the calm of a person who has never needed to raise her voice to command a room. Mr. Fontaine. The Southern District filed in the Eastern Division this morning. I expect your attorneys have been notified. Derek laughed. It was too loud, too fast. This is wire fraud, she said. Money laundering through the coastal property acquisitions. Your co-defendant in the Marsh Holdings deal accepted terms this afternoon. The laugh stopped. The room was completely silent now. No one pretended otherwise. Camille was standing near the garden entrance 10 feet away, and she could feel her heartbeat in her temples. Derek pointed at Warren. His hand was not steady. You orchestrated this. You came here to. I came here, Warren said, because your fiancé invited me. Something about his steadiness made Derek's agitation look larger by contrast. The whole room felt it. You've been targeting me, Derek said. This is retaliation. Mr. Fontaine. Admiral Reese's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The investigation began 22 months ago. Mr. Slade's firm contributed analysis to one portion of the financial architecture review. He was not the primary investigator. He did not file the motion, and he did not choose the date. A pause, precise and unhurried. The date was chosen by a federal judge. The doors of the Great Hall opened. 4 agents in dark jackets moved through the room with the contained efficiency of people who had done this many times and found no pleasure in any of them. The lead agent had a document in his hand and the expression of someone doing a job that simply needed to get done. He walked to Derek Fontaine. He said the words. The room exploded into noise, chairs scraping, phones raised, voices cutting across each other. Camille watched Derek walk out of his own wedding reception between federal agents and did not move. She was aware that her hands were shaking. She was aware that the photographer was still shooting somewhere behind her. She was aware of almost nothing that was not Warren Slade standing 15 feet away, watching all of it with his son's hand in his, looking less like a man who had won something than like a man who had been waiting for something painful to finally be over. Felix tugged his sleeve. Dad, he said quietly, is she okay? Warren looked at Camille. She wasn't okay. She could see from Warren's face that he knew it, and that he was genuinely concerned about it, which somehow made everything worse. The hall cleared fast. Staff moved with practiced efficiency. The coordinator was on the phone in the corner. Two of Camille's bridesmaids had materialized and were speaking to her in low, careful voices that she was nodding through without hearing. Eventually, everyone else drifted toward the exits, and she was standing near the cold fireplace in her wedding gown. And Warren was standing a few feet off, having sent Felix with Admiral Reese to wait by the cars. "You knew about Derek," she said. Warren said nothing. "For how long?" He took a breath. "I came across the Marsh holding structure 4 years ago during a separate engagement. We flagged it, we reported it, we didn't run the investigation. That's not what we do. I had no say in the timeline." Camille looked at the fireplace. "Did you know when we were together?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know who Derek Fontaine was when we were together. I found out 3 years after you left." She turned to look at him. "Did you try to warn me?" The silence before he answered was its own kind of answer. "Twice," he said. "You were at the Caldwell firm by then. Both times I called, the number had changed." He looked briefly at the floor. "I didn't have a way to reach you that wouldn't look like something it wasn't." Camille felt the weight of 8 years press in from all sides at once. "Warren," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant. "I left you because I thought you were going nowhere." "I know. I stood in our apartment and told you I needed someone with a plan." "Camille." "And you had one. You had an entire." "Camille," not unkindly. The same voice he'd used 8 years ago when he said, "I understand," and stepped aside so she could leave with her boxes. "I know." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. The mascara was probably done. None of the photos from this moment would be usable. Warren said, after a moment, "Rebecca died 4 years ago. Felix's mother. Car accident on the highway." He said it the way people say things they've had to say enough times that the sharpest edges have worn smooth. "Felix has her eyes, her way of watching people before he decides anything about them." He paused. "He asked me once why I kept a photograph on my desk of a woman he didn't recognize. I told him she was someone who helped me understand what I was actually trying to build, even when I couldn't explain it to her or to myself." Camille couldn't speak. "That's not me trying to make you feel guilty," Warren said. "I don't want that. I just thought you should know that even the hard parts of that time did something real." The garden outside was quiet. Somewhere in the oak trees, a mockingbird was running through its inventory of other birds' calls, unconcerned with any of the human wreckage below. The news cycle moved through the Fontaine arrest like weather, loud for 3 days, then dimming at the edges, then gone. Camille handled everything quietly and with the competence of a corporate attorney who had spent years managing other people's disasters and now, for the first time, was managing her own. She called Warren in February. He answered on the second ring, which surprised her. She had prepared herself to leave a message. "Felix has a baseball game on Saturday," he said before she could speak. "He said he was going to tell you himself if I didn't so." Camille was quiet for a moment. "How does he have my number?" He asked Admiral Reese for it. He asked the former, "How does a 9-year-old have that kind of conversation with?" "Felix is very direct," Warren said. "It's a gift and a problem." She came on Saturday. The park was in Raleigh, off a road lined with bare February trees, and the grass was the gray-green of a field that hadn't decided to wake up yet. Felix was pitching. He was not, it became clear, particularly skilled at it, but he was enthusiastic about it in the way children are enthusiastic about things they haven't yet been discouraged from pursuing. Warren was in the bleachers with a coffee and a jacket doing insufficient work against the cold. He moved over when he saw her. They didn't speak much through the first inning. Felix got 2 batters out and hit one in the helmet with a wild throw, then looked up at the bleachers with an expression of pure mortification that made both of them laugh at the same moment. "He's going to be fine," Camille said. "He's going to be fine," Warren agreed. After the game, Felix ran over with dirt on his knees and a scrape on his palm he wasn't fully accounting for, and he grabbed Camille's hand and said, "Did you see the second out? That was actually good." "That was actually very good," Camille said. Felix looked between the 2 adults with the frank evaluating gaze of a child who has decided something. "You guys should probably talk about stuff," he said. "I'll be over there." He pointed at the snack table and walked away with great, deliberate purpose. Camille looked at Warren. Warren said, "Diplomatic." "Apparently." She turned back toward the empty field, the other parents filtering toward the parking lot. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "Do you regret any of it, the last 8 years?" Warren thought about it the way he thought about serious things, slowly and without performing the thinking. "No," he said finally. "I built something I'm proud of. I have Felix. I learned what I was actually made of." He looked out at the field. You leaving forced me to get quiet and figure out what I actually wanted. Turns out I wanted to build something that mattered and raise a good kid. A small smile. 2 for 2. Camille watched Felix at the snack table, negotiating aggressively for a second bag of chips. Warren, she said, I'm sorry. I know. Not because of how it turned out for you. Because of what I said when I left, what I implied. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said again differently this time, not dismissing it, receiving it. Felix returned carrying chips and wearing the expression of someone who had done his adult duty and expected recognition for it. Okay, he said, looking between them. Better? Warren put a hand on the back of his son's neck. Better, he said. Felix opened his chips and walked ahead of them toward the parking lot, narrating his personal highlights from the game to no one in particular, the February wind lifting his voice and carrying it forward into the pale afternoon light. Warren and Camille followed a step behind, not quite side by side, not quite separate. Two people walking into an afternoon that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be, and finding for the first time in a long while that neither of them needed it to decide right now.